Hello my friends, and welcome to Tom's Tinkering and Adventures. Well, I have, as always, more projects going on. So today I am going to try to wrap up a project that I thought I was done with, but just not quite there, and that's the Honda XR400R dirt bike that I'm working on. So today we're going to do a little video on carburetor rejetting. It's kind of funny because I was talking with my good buddy Robert Roy, YouTube's cooking channel. So if you're interested in cooking channel, go ahead and look that up and check him out. He's always cooking something new and something good. But I helped him out, fixed his lawnmower for him, and he was asking me about carburetors. He's like, well, what the heck still has carburetors these days? His cars don't have them. And I said, yeah, there's still some motorcycles that do. A couple of street legal motorcycles still have carburetors, and a lot of smaller dirt bikes do. But pretty much everything is fuel injection these days. But there's just enough stuff out there with carburetors that I do a lot of work on them. So I am going to pull the carburetor off of that bike one more time and put it up here on my workbench, and I'll show you what you need to do to rejet a carburetor, how to adjust some of the settings on it, and try in my Tom's Tinkering and Adventures way of explaining how the different jets, different parts in the carburetor work together, and what you need to change if you're having what issues. So I'll try to dumb it down. I'm pretty dumb already, but I'll try to dumb it down so that even if you aren't going to be working on something like this, maybe you'll learn a little something, maybe you'll find it entertaining. You can always just laugh at me. I'm all right with that. So let me get over here, pull this carburetor off, and I'll put it on a bench and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so this is the carburetor off of a Honda XR400. This is a, let's see if we can get some decent focus on here. This is a Kian carburetor, and it's what's called a pumper carburetor because as you turn the throttle, it actually lifts the slide. Okay, so generally on your motorcycle carburetors, you got a float bowl. That's the bottom here. This is your fuel inlet. So the fuel from the tank flows into here, and it goes into this float bowl. Now when we take this off, there's probably still a little bit of fuel in here. I drained most of it out, but we'll pull this off. So inside the float bowl is a float, and that is what controls your fuel level in your carburetor. Now this right here is the float. On older motorcycles, this will be made out of brass, probably. Newer ones, they're all plastic. And by older, I'd say probably maybe even up to the early 80s, but at least in the 70s. And prior to that, these were made of brass. And the older ones can develop pinhole leaks. And I guess even the new ones probably could. It's pretty rare to see. Now, let's see here. Let's take this off. On this float is a needle, float needle. Let's see if we can focus here. Focus is not very good, I apologize. But it's got a little rubber tip on it. Let me try to get a little bit better light on the subject here so that we can get some decent focus. That's incredibly better, look at that. All right, so right there you can see the rubber tip on that. So what happens is the fuel flows in to the carburetor through that, right there, your hose off of your gas tank. It goes into here, and inside of there, this little brass piece here, it is a conical shape. And then as the fuel goes into this float bowl and reaches a certain level, then this float pivots on that shaft that I removed, and it lifts this seat up into there, and it seats into the bottom of that brass piece right there. And then that's what allows the certain amount of fuel to be in your float bowl. Now there's an adjustment on this. You can adjust this float by bending this little tab in the center where this thing mounts so that it can be higher or lower. So you have to look up the specifications on that. This is a pretty basic carburetor. In the bottom of it I have a main jet, an emulsion tube underneath it, and a pilot jet, and then this is the air screw. So first thing we're going to do is remove these two jets. I'll remove the pilot jet because I have the screwdriver right here. All right, so your pilot jet. Pilot jet controls your low speed stuff from idle to maybe just off idle. Now on the jets there is numbers. Let's see here if we can see it. We do have pretty good light. Let's see if we can see the number there. That one looks like it's a 52. You see that? It's kind of sideways. It looks like we get better light on it when it's sideways. 52. And that is, oops, that is the size of the hole through the center of it. And I know you can't see any light through there, but let me see if I can, there we go. We'll turn on the air compressor. We'll blow a little air through it. It probably has, excuse me there, probably has just a little bit of fuel in it. Just enough where you can't see through it. There we go. Now, there you go. I can see light through there. So the 52, I don't know exactly what that measures because each carburetor manufacturer has their own numbering system, but 52 is obviously, 50 will be smaller and a 55 is bigger. Imagine that. So for doing a little bit of research online, everyone recommends that you bump that thing up to about a 60. So I have ordered a 60 pilot jet here. Well, you can't barely read this one. I don't think you'll ever be able to see it on here. There you go, 60. So we're going to replace that with a 60, bigger. Now, the reason why you would want to go bigger or smaller on these is if you have one of two things. Sometimes these carburetors, these motorcycles are just set up incorrectly from the factory to meet emission standards. When I say incorrectly, it usually means lean. And lean means that they are not getting enough fuel to run properly or as good as they could. And why does the factory do something like that? Well, the reason why they do something like that is because even off-road motorcycles need to meet a certain emission standard. By operating in a lean condition, the exhaust emissions are going to be less than if it was running good or properly. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that's just the way it is. Now, a lean motorcycle can be identified by it's running hot, it's hard to start, and you can also check spark plugs. You can check the exhaust. If you pull off the exhaust pipe and you see the deposits on there, there's lots of ways to identify it. But generally it's easy today because we have the collective wisdom of the internet. So it's really nice. There's thousands of these Honda XR400s out there, so many people have tinkered around with this and changed out the jetting, and as I said, the 60 pilot jet is the recommended upgrade for this. And that should provide it easier starting and a little bit cooler operation. This bike was hard to start and also was very hot feeling. On to the main jet. Main jet, which I have already loosened, but it is a 6mm wrench, and you can hold this emulsion tube with a 7mm wrench. I'll pull both of them out and show you. This is the emulsion tube here. It has holes in the side of it, which, let's see, there you can see them. And it goes straight through. And this is where the needle that is attached to the slide, I don't know if I showed you that, but the slide has a needle on it. See the needle? And there's the tip of the needle. So the needle kind of goes around this. And the needle probably just barely seats into the bottom of the main jet. Your main jet provides your, well, mostly like 3/4 to wide open throttle. Now this one is a, let's see if we can see the number on it there together, 142, which is also the stock jetting for this bike. Most of the recommendations online said to go with a 160. 160, you can just barely see it. There you go. 160. And as you guessed, 160 is bigger than 142. And you can see the needle right in the bottom there. It looks a little crookedy. Let me see what we got there. Well, I guess it's just a little, it moves around a little bit, so. Actually, let me lift that up. There we go. We'll put that in and then make sure that it goes into there. Yeah, it looks like it's going in all the way. All right, so we'll tighten this emulsion tube down. We'll tighten this main jet into the emulsion tube. This little piece here is just a some sort of a spacer of some sort. I don't know exactly what this does, but we're going to put it back there. All right, so another item that you can do to adjust on these carburetors is this needle. So you can either change to a completely different needle, or you can pull this needle out and move it up or down. Most of the stuff I've read on this one says you don't have to mess with the needle, but we will double check it. This one's a little bit harder to get out than on some models. The ones that are a constant velocity carburetor where the slide is not directly attached to the throttle linkage are actually easier to get out. Oh, let me pull this out for y'all too here. This is sometimes called your idle air adjust or pilot air adjust. There's a couple different names for it. This is just a little needle. And it has a spring. And there's usually a washer and an O-ring in there, and it's probably still in there. I know it's in there because I've taken this apart before. This has a little tip on it. And you screw this into here until it lightly stops. So you don't want to crank it down, so you just turn it in. And as it starts getting in there, you slow down. Don't turn it too hard. You just want it to seat against the body of the carburetor in there, and you'll feel it. There you go. And possibly you can see inside of there. Right down in there. Let's see if we can move this light. You can just see the tip of it sticking up out of there. So that means it's seated in there now. There will be a factory specification for turning this out, and then a modified, like with this bike, it has a little bit open exhaust and a little bit open air intake. So you want to turn it out a certain number of turns. So from where it's at right now, you see the slot is straight there. So you're going to turn it. Now remember that this is only considered half of a turn. So that's 1/2, 1 complete revolution, 1 1/2, 2, 2 1/4. So we'll go 2 1/4. Now you can adjust this on the bike. And there's ways of telling you set the idle down, and then you screw this thing in a 1/4 turn and out a 1/4 turn and listen for the idle. And if the idle changes, then you just keep messing with it until you get the idle, the highest point it is. So there's just, you know, it's sort of like, they call a lot of work on carburetors black magic, because you kind of have to have a feel for a machine and play around a little bit and get your own feel for it, I guess is the best way to put it. All right, so before we put that on there, of course, we should put the float back in there, right? So let's get that back in, and we'll button this thing up. Just for funsies, not Fonzie's, he was on that show Happy Days, but just for funsies, I removed the needle here so I can show you all. There we go, get some focus. You can do it there, little fella. There we go. Just to show you the adjustability on this. So it has a clip on the end of it and some slots. Now, this is an aftermarket needle, and you can move that clip farther up or farther down here, and that will raise or lower this, and that will help with the transition on-off throttle between picking up from the idle jet all the way up until it goes into the main jet. So I'm going to have to look up where this thing should be, because it's set right in the middle, which is okay. A lot of times it wants it to move it farther down, which raises the needle out of the seat from the main jet. So I'll do a little bit of research and find out what the setting is. On this carburetor, it's kind of a pain in the butt to get this out, because you have to take a lot of things out. I didn't really go over how that all comes apart. Every carburetor is a little different, but most of these needles are exactly the same. Now, this is an aftermarket needle. I have a whole box full of goodies over here. Let me show you what a stock one looks like, if I can dig one out from here. There we go. There's a stock one in here somewhere. Come on, little fella, you can do it. Your stock ones are generally non-adjustable. And they probably, like, this is not the stock one for this carburetor, but they probably have a different taper. You see how this one is way more tapered than that one? So if you get an aftermarket needle, the taper will be different, and you'll have the adjustability. Now, you can adjust a stock needle, but the only thing you can do is put a couple of washers under here, which will then lift the needle up. So I'll find out where this needs to go, and I'll put it all back together. All right, all those adjustments are fine and dandy. I'm sure y'all are saying, well, what's the final outcome on that? You know, have you heard the saying, the proof's in the pudding, I suppose? And, well, the carburetor is installed. Now, I got a little bit excited, and I kicked it before I had the camera on, and it started cold. In 2 kicks, it kind of started, and then I actually turned the choke off, and it started on the 3rd kick. Now, I've ran it up and down the driveway a couple times here, and one of the complaints that the gentleman had on this thing was, yeah, all right, I can get it started cold, and it wasn't starting great. He said, but it wouldn't start hot. Now, it's not ridiculously hot, but it's warm. And, oh, here, just for y'all's know how and know to here, let me show you here. I got my kick-starting boot on. 1 tennis shoe, 1 boot. Nice. I bruised the hell out of my foot the other day starting my buddy's KTM. So let's see if we can't get an eye on the jackass starting this thing. That's me, by the way. There we go. All right, so it's warm. It's not hot, it's warm. Let's see how she starts. Okay with that. So there we have it, XR400R Honda, carburetor jetting. Now it's time for a cold beverage, and I just got the call from my buddy to go check out his BMW. And the fun never stops around here. People know me, and you know what? It feels good to be wanted. Thank you very much for watching. Get out there and find your adventure. Adios.